The moment my wife smiled at her ex and said, "Bradley was the man I should have chosen," something inside me stopped trying to survive the marriage and started preparing to leave it. I was standing 10 feet away with a glass of club soda in my hand, wearing the same navy suit Claire once said made me look dependable, which I later understood was her polite word for invisible. The ballroom at the Fairmont in downtown Chicago glittered like a showroom for people who believed money was a personality. Crystal lights hung above white linen tables, servers moved between clusters of executives with silver trays, and every laugh in that room sounded rehearsed, polished, expensive. Claire stood near the center of it all in a black evening dress, her hand resting lightly on Bradley Hayes' forearm like it had always belonged there. He was laughing, chin lifted, one hand in his pocket, the kind of man who knew exactly how much space his body could take up before anyone dared call it arrogance. Hayes Meridian Group had rented the entire top floor for its annual investor gala, and Bradley, its CEO, was performing like a king in front of his court. I had seen men like him before. Loud confidence, perfect teeth, a watch that cost more than some people's cars, and just enough charm to make cruelty sound like a joke. Claire had asked me to come that night because, in her words, it would look better if I was there. Not because she wanted me beside her, not because she was proud of me, because I completed the picture. Husband in the background, wedding ring visible, smile when necessary, speak only when invited. For 12 years, I had mistaken peace for love and quiet for loyalty. That night taught me the difference. Bradley raised his glass when he saw me watching. "Nathan," he called, loud enough for the circle around him to turn. "Come on over. Don't hide over there like security." A few people chuckled. Claire's smile tightened, but she did not correct him. That was the first cut. I walked over slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to remember every detail. The smell of expensive cologne, the low hum of a jazz trio near the bar, the way Claire shifted closer. To him, and not to me. Bradley gave my shoulder a friendly pat that felt more like someone checking the strength of cheap furniture. "Claire tells me you work in consulting," he said. "Something with systems, right?" I nodded. "Something like that." He smiled wider. "Must be nice. Flexible schedule. Low pressure. Meanwhile, some of us are out here building companies." The circle laughed again, softer this time, testing the room. I looked at Claire. Just once. A husband learns to read his wife in small movements. The blink she avoids. The breath she holds. The apology she almost gives but swallows because the crowd matters more. She looked down into her champagne glass and smiled as if Bradley's words were harmless. That was the second cut. Then a woman from his marketing team, I think her name was Dana, said, "Claire, you two knew each other in college, right?" Bradley leaned back like he had been waiting all night for that door to open. "Knew each other?" Claire broke my heart senior year. The group made the kind of sympathetic sound people make when they are enjoying someone else's history. Claire laughed, softer than before, younger somehow. I had not heard that version of her laugh in years. "We were kids," she said. Bradley looked at me and lifted his eyebrows. Some choices age better than others. The third cut came clean. No one in that circle knew where to look, so they chose the safest place. Their drinks, their shoes, the skyline beyond the glass. Claire should have said my name. She should have reached for my hand. She should have done one small thing to remind the room that I was not a prop she had dragged in from home. Instead, she stared at Bradley with a sadness that did not belong to our marriage. "Bradley was the man I should have chosen," she said. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, like a truth she was tired of hiding. The room went still in that polite corporate way, where nobody moves because movement would admit they heard too much. I felt the sentence settle in my chest, not like fire, but like ice finding the deepest part of a lake. Bradley did not look embarrassed. He looked pleased. He turned toward me with a grin and tapped the rim of his glass against mine. "Don't worry, Nate," he said. "Some men are built to lead. Some are built to clap." There it was. The joke. The verdict. The invitation to shrink. Years ago, I might have defended myself. I might have asked Claire why. I might have tried to turn pain into a conversation and conversation into hope. But something about that ballroom, that skyline, that ridiculous glass in Bradley's hand, made everything suddenly clear. I was not losing my wife in that moment. I was meeting the version of her that had already left. So I smiled. Not because it was funny. Not because it did not hurt. I smiled because Bradley Hayes had no idea that 3 floors below us, in a locked conference room guarded by 2 attorneys and a courier from Delaware, the final board packet for Hayes Meridian Group was already waiting with my signature on it. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I did not need to check it to know what it said. Evelyn Carter was precise, and she only sent messages when something was finished. The documents were ready. The votes were secured. The debt conversion window had opened at midnight Eastern. Bradley thought this night was his stage. Claire thought she was choosing the stronger man. Neither of them knew the company he bragged about had been breathing through a financial tube I paid for, hidden behind Northline Capital, a name Bradley had cursed in meetings without ever knowing it belonged to me. I placed my untouched glass on the nearest table, adjusted my cuff, and looked at my wife one last time before the old part of me disappeared. "You're right, Claire," I said quietly. "Some choices age better than others." Then I walked away while they were still smiling, because by morning, nobody in that room would be laughing. I walked out of the ballroom before my hands could betray me. Not shaking, not clenched, just too aware of themselves, like they belonged to a man who had finally realized how long he had been holding something heavy. The hallway outside the gala was quiet except for the distant pulse of jazz leaking through the double doors and the soft ding of an elevator somewhere beyond the marble columns. I stopped beside a floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at Michigan Avenue, where headlights slid through the city like white threads through black cloth. Chicago looked cold from up there. Beautiful, sharp, indifferent. That suited the moment. Behind me, Claire was probably explaining my exit with one of her practiced little smiles. Nathan gets overwhelmed at these things. Nathan is not really a people person. Nathan prefers quiet. She had been translating me into smaller words for years, and I had let her, because correcting someone you love every day starts to feel like begging to be seen. I had not always been invisible to her. 12 years earlier, Claire used to look at me like I was the safest place in the room. We met in a grocery store in Evanston during a thunderstorm, both reaching for the same last carton of eggs like 2 people in a commercial neither of us wanted to be in. She laughed first. I gave her the eggs. She gave me her number on the back of a receipt that still lives in a box in my home office, folded twice, the ink fading but not gone. Back then, she liked that I drove an old Ford Explorer with a stubborn heater and a glove compartment that would not close unless you hit it just right. She liked that I cooked breakfast on Sundays, that I remembered how she took her coffee, that I listened more than I talked. She used to say ambition did not have to be loud. I believed her. Maybe that was my mistake. I built my life around quiet strength. I worked in systems consulting, at least that was the version people understood. The fuller truth was harder to explain at dinner parties without sounding like a man trying to impress strangers. I studied failing companies, debt structures, leadership weaknesses, hidden value, and the small cracks that eventually bring down tall buildings. I helped private funds decide when to invest, when to walk away, and when to step in before a bad captain sank a good ship. After enough years, I stopped advising from the outside and started building my own positions from the shadows. Northline Capital began in a spare bedroom with 2 monitors, a second-hand desk, and a rule I wrote on a yellow sticky note. Never let ego touch the money. That rule made me rich long before anyone knew my name. It also made me quiet. Claire knew some of it, but not all. She knew I had investments. She knew I did well. She knew the mortgage was paid early, her student loans disappeared without a speech, and her mother's medical bills never touched a collection agency. But I never stood in the kitchen and waved bank statements like proof of manhood. I thought providing without performing was dignity. Over time, she decided it was dull. The first change was not dramatic. It never is. It was a delayed answer when I asked about dinner. A phone turned face down on the counter. A new password, she said, was for work security. More evenings with people from Bradley's company. More stories that started with Bradley says, and Bradley thinks, and Bradley believes. His name entered our house slowly, like smoke under a door. At first, I told myself not to be insecure. Men my age know how dangerous imagination can be when marriage gets quiet. You can build a courtroom in your head and convict someone on shadows. So I stayed fair. I made coffee. I asked questions. I gave her room. She took the room and built a wall with it. By spring, Claire had started dressing differently for meetings with Hayes Meridian Group. Not in a way that meant anything by itself, but marriage is built on patterns, and broken patterns make noise. She bought new heels for a Tuesday strategy dinner. She laughed at messages she would not show me. She came home smelling like hotel lobby perfume and expensive wine, carrying herself with the glow of someone who had been admired under bright lights. I would be in the kitchen, rinsing 2 plates instead of 1, and she would kiss my cheek like a courtesy. Not cold. Worse. Polite. Bradley became the mirror she preferred. He reflected back a version of her that felt younger, sharper, more important. I became the furniture that had always been there. Reliable. Paid for. Easy to ignore. The cruel thing about being taken for granted is that it does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like a woman scrolling through her phone while you tell her about your day. Sometimes it looks like her forgetting the anniversary of the night you proposed because she has an early call with a man who still remembers what dress she wore in college. Sometimes it sounds like her saying, "You would not understand," when the truth is she stopped wanting you to. I stayed because I had made vows, and vows are not decorations to me. My father taught me that a man's word should weigh more than his mood. So I carried the silence. I carried the small humiliations. I carried the version of Claire that still existed in old photographs and quiet Sunday mornings. But in that hallway outside Bradley's gala, with her sentence still ringing behind my ribs, I finally understood something I should have faced months earlier. Claire had not chosen him in that ballroom. She had been choosing him in inches, one laugh, one lie, one comparison at a time. The ballroom only gave her a microphone. My phone buzzed again. This time I took it out. Evelyn's message was short, clean, final, board package delivered. Emergency session confirmed for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then I looked at my reflection in the window. Same suit, same face, different man looking back. The old Nathan would have gone back inside and tried to save the evening. The man in the glass knew the evening had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had shown me who everyone was before the papers showed them what I owned. I did not sleep well that night. The city lights outside my bedroom window blurred as if they had been painted in watercolors. Chicago felt quieter from the 43rd floor than it ever had when I walked its streets. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, letting the steam curl and fill the kitchen with the faint smell of roast and strength, the kind that wakes the mind and steadies the hands. Claire was asleep, I assumed, in the bedroom that had once been ours, though it no longer felt like mine. I could hear the faint hum of her air purifier, the sound so ordinary that it mocked the chaos from the night before. I sat at the kitchen counter, tracing the rim of my mug with a fingertip, and allowed my thoughts to spiral into patterns I had been rehearsing for months. Bradley Hayes was not only in our lives again, but he had become the mirror that reflected Claire's ambition and desire. He had charisma, presence, the kind of confidence that seemed effortless. Yet behind that confident smile, I knew a foundation of fragility hid. He relied on borrowed attention, corporate facades, and applause from the crowd. The more he smiled, the more he needed to be admired, and the more I realized the opportunity that lay quietly in my hands. Northline Capital's documents were on my desk. Contracts, shareholder agreements, and emergency audit plans lay in a neat stack, precise, organized, ready to execute. Every clause had been verified, every contingency prepared. The city outside had no idea a man they assumed to be merely a husband, a quiet, unremarkable consultant, was the holder of the strings that could shift the balance in a company worth hundreds of millions. I made a mental list of all the moves I would make when the time came. Timing was everything. Patience was the weapon that ensured victory without raising alarms. I reviewed the structure, debt conversion, control clauses, voting rights, and the conditions that would allow me to step in seamlessly. I remembered each slight, each laugh Claire had given Bradley, each whispered comment meant to diminish me. They were not insults to be reacted to, but signals. Signals that marked the exact point where action would have maximum effect. I drafted the initial emails in my mind, board notifications, meeting schedules, audit confirmations. Every word was deliberate, precise, nothing unnecessary. By mid-morning, I walked through our apartment, observing the quiet remnants of our life together. Books stacked in their usual order, coffee mugs dried on the counter, photographs that captured smiles now tinged with the knowledge of what had shifted. I moved each item carefully, almost ritualistically, acknowledging what had been, preparing for what would come. Then I called Evelyn Carter, my attorney, and Mark Donovan, the auditor I trusted without question. I gave them the briefest instructions. Meet at the office, review the packet, confirm execution. There was no anger in my voice, no need to dramatize. The work itself was the language of consequence. Claire would notice nothing yet, and Bradley would remain confident in his performance. Control was quiet, invisible, unstoppable when exercised from knowledge rather than force. I spent the rest of the day reviewing reports, checking the compliance records, ensuring that when the meeting occurred, the board would act without hesitation. I walked to the window again as evening approached, looking out over the river, the lights reflecting in the water like lines of code, precise, connected, forming a grid of opportunity. I felt no rush, no anxiety. The coffee had cooled, but my focus remained hot, deliberate. Claire returned late, perhaps from another dinner or meeting with Bradley, and I watched her silhouette against the hall light. She smiled politely, perhaps assuming I had spent the day thinking of nothing. In reality, every movement, every glance, every whispered word from the night before had been catalogued, measured, and placed into the sequence that would soon unfold. I did not speak, did not question, did not react to the story she recounted as she unpacked her bag. Instead, I made my own preparations quietly, knowing that the culmination of months of careful observation and patient strategy would soon arrive. By bedtime, I felt the steady weight of certainty in my chest. I was no longer a passive observer in the lives of Claire and Bradley. I had aligned every detail, anticipated every counter, and prepared a course that would be executed with precision. The night stretched before me, calm, unbroken, filled only with the awareness that the coming days would reveal not just the truth of corporate structures and control, but the revelation of who held real power, quietly, without spectacle, while the world above continued unaware. By Thursday morning, the silence between Claire and me had grown so thick it felt like another person living in the apartment. She moved through the kitchen in her cream blouse and charcoal skirt, checking messages while the coffee machine hissed behind her, every gesture polished, every breath scheduled. I stood by the sink rinsing a cup I had not used, watching the diamond on her left hand catch the early sunlight. 12 years of marriage reduced to the sound of ceramic under running water, and a woman pretending not to notice that her husband had stopped asking questions. She glanced up once. "I have another Hayes Meridian dinner tonight," she said, as if reporting the weather. "Bradley wants the communications team aligned before the board session tomorrow." I dried the cup slowly. Tomorrow. Her eyes flicked back to her phone a little too fast. Just internal strategy. Nothing you would care about. There it was again. The soft dismissal. Not cruel enough to fight over. Not kind enough to forgive. I nodded. "Have a good time." That surprised her. I saw it in the small pause before she reached for her keys. A month earlier, I might have asked who would be there. 3 months earlier, I might have suggested dinner together instead. A year earlier, I might have believed the right words could pull her back across the distance. But that morning, I had no interest in chasing a woman who had already packed her heart and left the house. Claire kissed the air near my cheek and walked out smelling like expensive perfume and decision. The door closed with a soft click. I stood in the quiet, then crossed the apartment to my office. The Northline files waited on my desk, lined up in perfect order. The convertible debt agreement, the default notice draft, the covenant breach summary, the proxy confirmations, and the emergency control memorandum. I ran one hand over the folders the way another man might touch a family Bible, not out of worship, but because some documents carry the weight of judgment. At 9:15, Evelyn Carter called. "The board is nervous," she said. Evelyn never wasted words. She had been a corporate attorney for 22 years, and her voice had the calm edge of a woman who had watched powerful men discover the limits of confidence. "Good," I said. "Nervous people read carefully." Samantha Reed confirmed. "She will attend in person." That mattered. Samantha had been Hayes Meridian's chief operations officer until Bradley slowly pushed her out of meaningful decisions. She knew the business, the employees, the clients, and the damage hidden behind Bradley's speeches. More importantly, she knew the numbers were not a misunderstanding. "And Bradley?" I asked. Evelyn gave the smallest sigh. "Still believes tomorrow is about additional funding." I looked out at the city, at the river cutting between glass towers. "Let him." After the call, I drove 32 miles north to a small office park in Lake Forest where Northline kept its name off the lobby directory. The building looked forgettable on purpose. Gray brick, tinted windows, parking lot with cracked white lines, no fountain, no gold letters, nothing to impress a man like Bradley Hayes. That was why I liked it. Real power does not always need a skyline view. Sometimes it sits behind a locked conference room door with bad coffee and clean paperwork. Mark Donovan was already there, sleeves rolled up, silver hair combed back, reading through the audit findings with a blue pen in his hand. Mark had the face of a patient accountant and the instincts of a bloodhound. He did not raise his voice when he found something wrong. He just circled it, documented it, and made sure no one could explain it away later. "It is worse than we thought," he said without looking up. I took the chair across from him. "How much worse?" He slid a packet toward me. Executive travel charged as client development. Vendor payments routed through a consulting entity tied to Bradley's brother-in-law. Deferred revenue used to soften quarterly losses. Nothing flashy enough to scare amateurs. Plenty enough to scare a serious board. I opened the packet. Page after page, clean lines, dates, signatures, amounts. Not gossip, not suspicion. Facts. That was the difference between revenge and consequence. Revenge needs heat. Consequence needs proof. "Claire's name?" I asked. Mark paused, and that pause told me more than the answer. Not on the financial approvals. But she appears on travel itineraries listed as brand advisory support. I stared at the page until the words flattened. There was no graphic image in my mind, no dramatic scene, nothing I needed to imagine. Just two names on the same schedule, two hotel rooms billed under one. Corporate retreat, and a marriage becoming a footnote in an expense report. I closed the folder. Carefully, quietly. Mark watched me the way decent men watch another man receive bad news, without pitying him out loud. "We can keep her out of the board materials unless it becomes relevant," he said. "No," I replied. "We keep the focus on Bradley. I will deal with my marriage separately." The sentence sounded steady, almost professional. Inside, something old and loyal finally sat down from exhaustion. That evening, I followed Claire. Not because I needed more proof, but because some truths deserve to be seen once with your own eyes so your heart stops negotiating with them. I parked across from a restaurant near the river, a glass and steel place where valet attendants jogged for keys and men in tailored jackets laughed too loudly under patio heaters. Claire arrived at 7:12. Bradley was already waiting outside. He did not greet her like a colleague. He stepped close, spoke softly, and placed his hand at the small of her back as they went inside. I sat in my car with both hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling nothing at first. That was the strange part. No storm, no shaking, just a clean, terrible quiet. 2 hours later, they came out together. Claire looked lighter than she had looked with me in years. Bradley said something that made her laugh, and the sound reached me faintly through the windshield. Then she stopped near his car, and I saw her face change. Serious, open, unprotected. I lowered my window just enough to hear her when the traffic softened. "I cannot keep pretending," she said. Bradley leaned against the driver's door, proud before the victory was even official. "Then do not." Claire looked down at her ring, twisted it once, and said the words that ended what the ballroom had only wounded. "I am tired of being married to a man with no ambition." I stepped out before my mind could stop me. My shoes hit the pavement, one measured step, then another. Claire turned and went pale. Bradley straightened with that same polished grin, but this time I did not look at him. I looked only at my wife. "Then say it clearly," I said. "No audience. No champagne. No jokes. Just say what you want." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in months, there was no crowd to reward her performance. "Nathan," she whispered. "No," I said. "Not tonight." "Do you choose him?" Bradley's smile returned, slow and satisfied. Claire looked at him, then back at me, and the last 12 years stood between us like a house with the lights going out one by one. "Yes," she said. "I choose him." The words landed, but they did not break me. Maybe because the break had already happened. Maybe because tomorrow morning was already waiting. I nodded once, reached into my coat pocket, and removed my wedding ring. I did not throw it. I did not make a speech. I simply placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Thank you," I said. Claire blinked as if gratitude was the one reaction she had not prepared for. Bradley gave a short laugh. "That is it." I turned to him then. "For tonight." He smirked. What happens tomorrow? I looked at the shining Hayes Meridian pin on his lapel, then at the man wearing it like armor. Tomorrow, I said, you should arrive early. The drive home from the river felt longer than 30 minutes, not because of traffic, but because every mile carried a memory I was finally done protecting. Claire did not ride with me. She stood beside Bradley's car when I pulled away, her arms folded across herself, looking less like a woman in love and more like someone who had stepped onto a bridge and heard the boards crack beneath her shoes. Bradley watched me leave with that expensive grin still pinned to his face, but I had seen the flicker in his eyes when I told him to arrive early. Men like Bradley understood threats only when they were loud, emotional, or wrapped in profanity. They did not understand a calm warning because calm suggested preparation, and preparation was the one thing he never respected in other people. I reached our apartment at 10:46, rode the elevator up alone, and listened to the cables hum behind the walls. The doors opened to the hallway where Claire had once taped a wreath every Christmas and complained that the neighbors used too much glitter. Small memories have a cruel way of waiting for you in ordinary places. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned on only the lamp near my office. The apartment looked untouched, still arranged like a successful marriage. Framed vacation photos from Maine and Colorado. A cream sofa Claire chose after 3 weekends of debate. 2 wine glasses drying beside the sink from a dinner we had eaten in silence. Nothing had moved, but everything had changed. I went to the bedroom, took a small overnight bag from the closet, and packed like a man closing a file. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, a dark suit for the morning, toothbrush, charger. The wedding ring stayed in my coat pocket, heavy as a coin from a country that no longer existed. I did not take photographs. I did not take keepsakes. I had carried enough ghosts. In my office, I opened the lower drawer of my desk and removed the black binder marked with no company name. Inside were the documents Bradley had never imagined existed because he lived in a world where he assumed quiet men had empty hands. The first agreement went back 8 months, signed when Hayes Meridian Group had missed payroll by 48 hours and nearly lost a defense logistics client worth more than $30 million a year. Bradley had not told his employees that. He had walked into the office that week with a new Italian briefcase and told them growth required courage. What growth required was cash, and Northline Capital had provided it through a secured convertible note with strict conditions. The second document established default triggers. The third confirmed board observer rights. The fourth, the one Evelyn called the spine of the matter, gave Northline authority to convert debt into controlling preferred equity if Bradley misrepresented revenue, diverted funds, or violated reporting covenants. He had done all 3. Not once, not accidentally, repeatedly, confidently, and with the sloppy arrogance of a man who thought charisma could mop up numbers. I placed the binder in my leather briefcase beside the audit packet and Samantha Reed's signed declaration. Then I sat at the desk for a long moment and let the room settle around me. This was the part people misunderstand. They think the moment of revenge feels exciting. It does not. Not when the person who put the knife in your trust used to fall asleep beside you. Not when the man you are about to remove from power became the instrument your wife used to measure your worth. Victory, at that hour, felt like standing in an empty house after a storm and realizing the roof was gone, but the foundation had somehow held. At 11:28, Claire came home. I heard her key hesitate in the lock. That hesitation told me Bradley had not come up with her. Good. Some conversations should not have an audience. She stepped inside quietly, then stopped when she saw the overnight bag by my office door. Her makeup was still perfect, but her face was not. Nathan, she said. One word. So many years trying to hide inside it. I closed the binder and looked up. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult. Her eyes dropped to the briefcase. What does that mean? I stood and slipped the binder inside. It means Bradley has a board meeting at 8 o'clock, and for once, he will not control the room. She gave a short, nervous laugh. What did you do? There it was, the same question people ask when consequences finally arrive. Not what happened. Not what did he do. What did you do? I studied the woman I had loved through flu seasons, job changes, bad flights, family funerals, and all the small disappointments that make up a real life. Even then, some weak part of me wanted her to say she was sorry before she was afraid. She did not. I did not do anything tonight, I said. I started 8 months ago. Claire's face tightened. Started what? I picked up the briefcase. Saving his company. The words landed with a softness that made them worse. She blinked once, then again, like her mind refused to arrange them in the proper order. That is not funny. No, I said. It is not. I walked past her toward the door. She reached for my sleeve, not pulling, just touching, as if touch could still claim a right it had surrendered. Nathan, please. Explain this to me. I looked down at her hand, then back at her. You chose Bradley because you thought he was building something bigger than me. Tomorrow, you will find out what he was standing on. Her hand fell away. For the first time in years, Claire had no polished answer ready. The apartment hummed with refrigerator noise and unsaid things. I opened the door, paused, and gave her the only mercy I had left to offer. Do not sit near him tomorrow, I said. When the truth starts moving, it does not care who is standing too close. Then I stepped into the hallway, let the door close behind me, and carried the proof into the quiet. At 6:30 the next morning, I stood in the lobby of the building where Hayes Meridian Group occupied floors 21 through 26, holding a leather briefcase in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. The lobby smelled like polished stone, fresh flowers, and the kind of ambition that wears a visitor badge. Men and women moved past me in tailored coats, checking phones, balancing laptop bags, rehearsing versions of themselves before the elevator doors opened. None of them looked twice at me. I liked that. Being underestimated had become so familiar, it almost felt like a home field advantage. The security guard asked for my name, and when I gave it, his expression changed just enough to tell me Evelyn had done her job. Mr. Whitaker, he said, standing a little straighter, they are expecting you upstairs. I nodded and walked toward the elevator without correcting the tremor in his voice. On the ride up, my reflection stared back from the brushed metal doors. Same man from the gala. Same quiet face. Same navy suit. But the air around me felt different now, like the moment before a judge enters a courtroom. My phone buzzed once. Evelyn was already in conference room B with Mark Donovan and Samantha Reed. The board packet had been distributed at 7:45. Bradley had arrived at 7:58. Claire had arrived with him at 8:03. I read that last line twice, not because it surprised me, but because pain has a habit of checking whether it still matters. It did. Less than yesterday, but more than I wanted. The elevator opened onto the 24th floor, where the Hayes Meridian logo stretched across a white wall in steel letters. I had seen that logo in hundreds of reports, loan schedules, and covenant reviews. Seeing it in person felt strange, like finally walking into a house after studying its blueprint for months. A receptionist looked up, prepared to give me the polite smile reserved for people who are not important enough to recognize. Then she saw my name on her tablet. The smile changed. Mr. Whitaker, conference room B is this way. We passed glass offices and open workstations where employees were settling in, unaware that the company above their heads was about to change shape. A young analyst laughed at something on his screen. A woman near the copy machine balanced a stack of folders against her hip. Real people, real paychecks, real families. That was why I had stepped in 8 months ago. Not for Bradley, not for Claire, for them. A company is not its chief executive officer, no matter how loudly he speaks at fundraisers. It is the receptionist who remembers every courier, the operations manager who answers emails at midnight, the payroll clerk who makes sure Friday still happens. Bradley had treated Hayes Meridian like a stage. I was there to remind him it was a workplace. Conference room B sat at the end of a glass corridor overlooking the river. Through the frosted doors, I could see figures shifting around the long table. Evelyn opened the door before I touched the handle. Gray suit, pearl earrings, calm eyes. Right on time, she said. I try not to disappoint attorneys before breakfast. Her mouth almost smiled. Mark sat to her left with 2 binders and a laptop. Samantha Reed stood near the window, arms crossed, looking thinner than I remembered from our video calls, but steadier than anyone else in the room. She had the tired dignity of a person who had been right too early and punished for it. Nathan, she said, offering her hand. Thank you for coming in person. Thank you for telling the truth when it was inconvenient, I said. Her grip tightened once. Across the hall, through another glass wall, I saw Bradley in the main boardroom. He was standing at the head of the table, laughing with 2 directors as if this were a victory lap. Claire sat 3 chairs behind him near the wall, not officially part of the meeting, but close enough to be seen as his choice, his proof, his applause. She wore a pale blue dress I had bought her in Boston after she said it made her feel powerful. That memory came and went like a passing car. No crash, just light, then darkness. Evelyn followed my gaze. "Do you want her removed before we start?" she asked. I shook my head. No, she should hear the business version first. Mark glanced up. And the personal version? I picked up the board packet. That one does not belong in this room. We spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the sequence. First, Samantha would confirm operational irregularities. Then Mark would walk the board through the financial breaches. Evelyn would establish Northline's rights under the convertible note and secured creditor agreement. I would speak last, not as a husband, not as an angry man, not as somebody trying to win a scene, but as the controlling party with authority to act. That distinction mattered. Anger can be dismissed. Authority has to be answered. At 8:29, the board secretary entered and said they were ready. Evelyn gathered her papers. Mark closed his laptop. Samantha inhaled once, steadying herself. I looked through the glass at Bradley. He checked his watch, annoyed, already performing impatience for the room. Claire leaned toward him and said something. He smiled without looking at her, the way men smile at accessories. For 1 second, I wondered if she noticed. Then Evelyn opened the boardroom door. Conversation faded. Chairs shifted. Bradley's eyes moved from Evelyn to Mark to Samantha, and irritation crossed his face before recognition did. "Samantha," he said. "I was not aware this was a reunion." She did not answer. Then he saw me. His smile returned, slow and entertained. "Nathan," he said, spreading his hands. "Spouses are not allowed in board meetings." A few people turned toward me, uncertain, embarrassed for a mistake that was not mine. Claire's face went white so quickly it almost looked like the light had changed. I set my briefcase on the table, opened it, and placed the black binder in front of the chair reserved for Northline Capital. Then I looked at Bradley, not loudly, not theatrically, just clearly enough for the whole room to understand the morning had changed. "Good," I said. "Then let us speak shareholder to chief executive officer." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of doors locking. Bradley stared at the binder as if it had appeared on the table by magic. For the first time since I had known him, his smile did not know where to sit on his face. It tried arrogance first, then amusement, then irritation, and finally settled into something close to suspicion. "Shareholder?" he said, with a short laugh meant for the board. "That is cute. Did Claire tell you we were discussing corporate finance, and you decided to play along?" Nobody laughed. That was the first sign he was losing the room. Board members are like birds on a wire. They feel a storm before the sky changes color. Evelyn Carter stepped forward and placed a copy of the secured convertible note in front of the board chair, a retired banker named Harold Whitcomb, whose silver eyebrows moved together as he read the first page. "For the record," Evelyn said, "Northline Capital is the senior secured creditor of Hayes Meridian Group under the agreement executed 8 months ago. As of midnight Eastern Time, multiple covenant breaches have triggered conversion and control rights under Sections 4, 7, and 11. Bradley's face hardened. "Northline sent counsel?" Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Northline sent its principal." His eyes cut back to me. The room tightened. Claire sat near the wall with both hands folded in her lap, her ring catching the light, her face still pale from the first reveal. I did not look at her for long. Some wounds beg for attention because they know attention keeps them alive. I turned to Harold. "Mr. Whitcomb, with your permission, we should begin with the financial record." Harold cleared his throat. "Proceed." Mark Donovan opened his laptop, connected to the screen, and the first slide appeared. Payroll variance, delayed vendor obligations, and revenue recognition issues. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just numbers lined up like witnesses that had taken an oath. Mark spoke in his steady Midwestern voice, the kind that made bad news sound unavoidable rather than exciting. Over the last 2 quarters, Hayes Meridian Group reported adjusted revenue projections to Northline Capital that materially differed from internal collections data. In plain English, the company told lenders money was coming in faster than it was. Bradley lifted both hands. "That is a timing issue. Every growth company manages timing." Samantha Reed spoke for the first time. Not by moving unpaid invoices into expected receipts and calling them secured. Her voice was quiet, but it changed the temperature in the room. Bradley turned on her with a smile, too sharp to be friendly. Samantha, you have been away from executive operations for months. Because you removed me from them after I questioned the vendor payments, she said. The board members looked down at their packets. Pages turned. Paper has a sound when people begin to understand fear. Mark advanced the slide. Vendor payments. Travel costs. Advisory fees. Dates. Amounts. Names. Here, he continued, we found $286,000 in payments to Ashford Strategic Solutions, a consulting entity incorporated by Bradley's brother-in-law. We found no deliverables, no reports, no measurable services, and no approval from the audit committee. Bradley's jaw moved once. That vendor was confidential. Evelyn did not blink. Confidential is not a substitute for legitimate. Another slide appeared. Executive travel. Private dining. Luxury transportation. A corporate retreat charged as client development. Claire's name appeared twice as brand advisory support. Not highlighted. Not accused. Just present. That was enough. I heard her breath catch from across the room. Bradley saw it too, and for the first time, his annoyance became something uglier. Panic dressed as outrage. This is absurd, he said. You are letting a jealous husband turn a board meeting into a personal circus. There it was. The escape hatch. Reduce facts to feelings. Make the betrayed man look unstable. I had expected it. Evelyn had expected it. Even Mark, who rarely changed. Expression, looked almost bored. I leaned forward slightly. Bradley, my marriage is not on the agenda. He laughed. Really? Then why are you here? I opened the black binder to the signature page and slid it toward Harold. Because when your company was 48 hours from missing payroll, Northline Capital provided a secured 8-figure rescue facility. When you needed credibility with lenders, Northline gave you that credibility. When your employees thought leadership had stabilized the company, it was our capital keeping the lights on. And when you signed that agreement, you personally certified the accuracy of every financial statement attached to it. Harold adjusted his glasses, reading faster now. Mr. Hayes, he said, voice low, is this your signature? Bradley looked at the page. His face changed in tiny pieces. I signed hundreds of documents. That was not the question, Samantha said. He ignored her. This was handled by finance. Mark clicked once more. An email appeared on the screen. Bradley to Chief Financial Officer. Subject line, make the Northline package clean. The timestamp was 2 days before funding. The room went so still I could hear the building air system whisper overhead. Bradley stared at the email, then at Mark, then at me. You hacked my company? Mark said. Your chief financial officer produced this under board authorization at 7:40 this morning. That was the moment Bradley understood the doors behind him were not open anymore. I watched him search faces around the table. Harold would not meet his eyes. 2 directors whispered to each other. The general counsel was already writing notes. Bradley had walked into that room expecting a funding discussion and found a record of his own decisions waiting for him in chronological order. Claire looked at me then. Not with love. Not with anger. With confusion. As if the man she had dismissed had stepped out from behind a curtain, wearing a life she never bothered to ask about. I felt the pull of that look, the old instinct to explain myself gently, to soften the truth so she could survive it. I let the instinct pass. Evelyn stood beside my chair and placed one final document in front of Harold. Under Section 11, Northline Capital is exercising its conversion rights and requesting immediate recognition of controlling preferred equity, suspension of Bradley Hayes as Chief Executive Officer pending full audit review, and appointment of an interim executive controller to preserve operations. Bradley shoved his chair back. Not violently, just fast enough to make the room flinch. You cannot do this. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The man Claire thought was larger than life seemed suddenly ordinary under fluorescent boardroom lights. A suit, a title, a mouth full of confidence with nowhere left to spend it. I am not doing this to you, I said. You signed the agreement. You breached the terms. You documented the pattern. I am just the man who stopped looking away. Harold closed the folder and looked around the table. We will vote. Bradley turned toward Claire, maybe expecting loyalty, maybe rescue, maybe the same applause she had given him at the gala. But Claire did not move. She sat frozen, staring at the screen where his email still glowed above the long table. For once, she was seeing him without stage lights. The vote took less than 3 minutes. 5 in favor. 1 abstention. None opposed. Harold's voice came out dry. Motion passes. Evelyn exhaled softly. Mark shut his laptop. Samantha lowered her eyes for half a second, not in triumph, but in relief. Bradley stood at the head of the table, no longer leading anything. His company badge still hung from his jacket, but it looked decorative now. Claire finally whispered my name. I did not answer. Harold turned to me. Mr. Whitaker, as interim executive controller, the floor is yours. I stood slowly, buttoned my suit jacket, and looked at the room that Bradley had entered as a throne and would leave as evidence. First, I said, payroll will be protected. Second, all questionable vendor payments are frozen. Third, no employee below executive level is to be blamed for decisions made above them. Then I looked at Bradley one last time. And fourth, Mr. Hayes will surrender company access before leaving the floor. His face drained of the last. Color arrogance had lent it. The silence after that was not shock anymore. It was order arriving. Bradley did not surrender his company access with dignity. Men like him never understand that dignity is cheapest before consequences arrive and most expensive after. He stood at the head of the boardroom table with his badge still clipped to his jacket, one hand resting on the leather chair as if touching the furniture might remind everyone it used to belong to him. Harold Whitcomb repeated the instruction in the dry, tired voice of a man who had sat through enough corporate collapses to know when pride was wasting billable hours. Mr. Hayes, your laptop, access card, and company phone. Bradley looked around the room, searching for one loyal face. The directors avoided him. The general counsel stared at his notepad. Samantha Reed watched without smiling, which somehow made it worse for him. Claire sat near the wall as if the chair beneath her had turned to ice. The woman who had stood beside him in restaurants and ballrooms, warmed by his spotlight, now looked at him like she was finally noticing the wires, dust, and cracked paint behind the stage. This is temporary, Bradley said, trying to aim the words at everyone and no one. You all know that, right? This is a lender overreach. A technical ambush. Evelyn Carter closed her folder. It is a contractual remedy. You keep saying that like it makes this clean. I looked at the screen where his own email still hovered above the table. It does not need to feel clean to be valid. He turned on me then, all polish stripped away. You planned this because of her. His eyes flicked toward Claire. Because you could not handle losing. The room absorbed that sentence, and for a moment I saw Claire flinch. Not because he was wrong about the wound, but because even she knew he was wrong about the cause. I stood still, keeping my voice level. I planned this before I knew what she had become to you. The words did not need to be louder than that. Claire's face changed, but I did not give the change a place to land. 8 months ago, I continued, your finance team contacted Northline through an intermediary because Hayes Meridian was days away from a missed payroll and a default with 2 major clients. You did not disclose that risk to employees. You did not disclose related party vendors to the board. You did not disclose adjusted revenue treatment to your secured creditor. None of that required my marriage to fail. It required your judgment to fail. Bradley opened his mouth, then shut it. There are few sounds more revealing than a man discovering confidence has no evidence behind it. Harold signaled to the company's information security director, a quiet man named Luis Ramirez who had been waiting outside with 2 members of the legal team. Luis stepped in carefully, almost respectfully, because good professionals do not need to enjoy a bad moment to do their jobs well. Mr. Hayes, he said, I need your devices. Bradley laughed once, sharp and empty. You are making a mistake, Luis. Luis held out a padded evidence bag. I am following board instruction. That sentence landed harder than any insult could have. Bradley pulled the phone from his pocket, set it on the table, then opened his laptop with unnecessary force and logged out under supervision. Luis verified the lockout, disabled administrative access, and confirmed remote backup preservation. The boardroom watched the transfer of power happen not through a dramatic speech, but through passwords, permissions, and a small plastic badge placed beside a company phone. That is how real control changes hands in America most of the time. Not with thunder, with compliance. I asked Mark to freeze all discretionary executive spending, including travel, entertainment, consulting vendors, and non-essential reimbursements above $5,000. I asked payroll to be reviewed first, then client obligations, then vendor exposure. I told Samantha to assemble a stabilization team by noon, and to identify every manager Bradley had silenced because they gave him inconvenient truth. She nodded once, and in that nod I saw the first honest breath the company had taken in months. Bradley heard all of it. The more ordinary my instructions became, the smaller he looked. He wanted a fight because a fight would let him perform. Strength. Instead, he had to stand there while the business continued without asking his permission. Finally, he reached for Claire. Not her hand, exactly, but her attention. "Tell him," he said. "Tell him this is personal." Claire looked up at him slowly. The room waited. I did not. I gathered my papers because I already knew the answer would not save anyone. "Claire," Bradley snapped, softer but desperate now, "say something." She swallowed. Her voice came out thin. "Did you know the company was in trouble?" Bradley stared at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. "That is not the point." "It is exactly the point," Samantha said. Claire looked from Samantha to the board packet, then to me. There was anger in her eyes, yes, but behind it was something worse for her, recognition. She was starting to understand that the man she had called unambitious had been carrying more power in silence than Bradley had ever held in a room full of applause. Bradley stepped back from the table. "This is not over." Evelyn answered before I could. "Correct. The audit begins today." 2 security officers arrived, not touching him, not crowding him, simply standing near the door with the professional calm of people who had done this before. Bradley looked at them, then at his badge, then at the boardroom he no longer commanded. The walkout took less than a minute. It felt longer. Employees outside the glass corridor began to notice as he passed, first with curiosity, then with the sudden quiet that moves through an office when everyone senses history without being told the details. Bradley kept his chin up until the elevator doors opened. Then, just before stepping inside, he turned toward me. "You think this makes you better than me?" I held his gaze. "No. I think payroll clearing tomorrow makes the company better without you." The elevator doors closed on his face, and the reflection of the corridor returned to the glass, bright and still. Behind me, Claire whispered, "Nathan." This time, I turned. She stood in the boardroom doorway, looking smaller than she had at the gala, not because she had changed clothes or posture, but because the fantasy around her had collapsed. "I did not know," she said. I believed that much. She had not known the numbers, the debt, the board rights, or the hidden structure. But ignorance is not innocence when you choose not to look too closely at the person you are admiring. "You knew enough to compare me to him," I said. She closed her eyes for half a second. I was wrong. The old me would have stepped toward her. The old me would have softened at those 3 words and mistaken regret for repair. Instead, I looked past her into the boardroom where people were already working, saving what could still be saved. "You were late," I said. Then I walked back to the table and opened the next file, because the company had employees to protect, and my marriage could wait its turn in the ruins. The boardroom had settled into a rhythm that Bradley could not influence anymore. Employees who had once been silent under his charisma were now speaking with measured authority, guided by Samantha Reed and the emergency stabilization team. Numbers, projections, and confirmations moved across screens, illuminated by fluorescent light, as if the room itself had become a living ledger. Claire remained in her seat near the wall, eyes downcast, tracing the edge of the table with her fingers, realizing how much she had been missing in the shadows. I moved to the head of the table, placing the binder in front of Harold Whitcomb, letting the authority encoded in legal documents and verified audits speak louder than any words I could utter. "First, we will reconcile all payroll obligations for this week and next," I said, calm and deliberate. "Second, all discretionary spending over $5,000 requires interim approval." My voice carried only the weight of fact, not emotion. Bradley's shoulders tightened as he realized that his capacity to influence decisions had vanished before anyone else had to speak. "You cannot just," he started, and stopped, searching for a loophole, a word, a justification, anything to regain control. Evelyn Carter interjected smoothly. "The agreement grants Northline Capital the authority to exercise these rights upon covenant breach. You executed the documents." A short silence. Bradley looked at Claire as if she might rescue him with a nod, a glance, anything. But she did not. Her gaze stayed fixed on the documents projected on the screen, the names, dates, and numbers she had trusted him to manage. Samantha cleared her throat and addressed the board. We have verified the vendor transactions, travel expenditures, and deferred revenue allocations, she said. All deviations are accounted for in the packet. Mark Donovan advanced the slides, and the numbers spoke without bias. Excess spending, misallocated payments, and previously undisclosed relationships with consulting entities linked to Bradley's family. Board members shifted in their seats, each page turning like a silent verdict. Bradley's confidence waned as he realized that charisma could not rewrite facts. The auditors, the documents, and the board's verification had created a structure he could not dismantle with charm or intimidation. I remained seated, observing the room, the company, and Claire without drama, letting the systematic unraveling of mismanagement occur as it should. Evelyn directed the final motions: suspension of Bradley's access, confirmation of Northline's control rights, and appointment of interim leadership under my direction. Bradley rose and stepped toward me, desperation in his measured movements. "This is personal," he said, attempting to shift the room's perception. I looked directly at him. "The company's integrity is not personal. Your mismanagement is. The remedies are contractual. My presence here is procedural." The room exhaled collectively, feeling the shift in authority and clarity. Claire's expression softened slightly, a trace of comprehension, as she realized that the man she had underestimated was not only competent, but deliberate and principled. Bradley exhaled, the fight leaving him as the elevator doors opened. He glanced at me one last time, searching for the man he thought he had known, the man behind the quietness he had mocked. I did not respond. The room remained calm, orderly, and functional. The company, its employees, and its stakeholders were secure for the first time in months. Claire finally rose, walking to the center of the room, her eyes meeting mine. There was no apology, only recognition. "I did not understand," she whispered. I nodded once. That was enough for her to see, but not enough for me to offer any further explanation. The work had been done. The company was preserved. Bradley had been removed. Claire had witnessed the consequences of underestimating quiet authority. I closed the binder, the final click of the latch echoing lightly across the room, a punctuation that no one needed to read aloud. Outside, the city continued its pace, indifferent to the human dramas within its glass towers. I walked past the board members who had assembled for governance rather than spectacle, and the realization settled into the air. The decisions, the facts, and the structured execution had restored balance. No one cheered. No one needed to. The company was intact, employees were protected, and the truth had been delivered in the only way that mattered. Claire followed silently, a subtle distance remaining between us, yet a shared understanding of what had occurred, of who had carried the weight, and of what had been revealed. The room had returned to routine, yet nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Control had been exercised quietly, deliberately, and irrevocably, leaving clarity where chaos had lingered and authority where silence had once reigned.